we're going to get into the prologue in this video of the book, hoping you have read the prologue by now, and however many delays we've had on even starting this class, maybe you're done with the entire book. So Socrates once said, I'm quite sure it was Socrates, said that an unexamined life is not worth living. An unexamined life is not worth living. In the last video, I wanted to talk about a social imaginary, a thought world to inhabit. One of the greatest reasons to have a well-informed thought world, even sets of stories, both true and maybe even untrue, that have moral lessons in them, is so that we can become more circumspect, that we can become more objective about ourselves. It's not actually an easy thing. Psychologists write that self-deception is very easy. And when you walk on into the pages of this book, The Great Divorce, you'll notice the self-deception in numerous characters. And so when we have characters to look at, we have a social imaginary, we have a well-developed thought life from which to draw forth these characters and to push off of the bad ones and to draw close to the good ones, it can help us to examine our life and not just live the unexamined life. It can help us to be more objective about ourselves. And I'll give you an example of this. Again, my children and I are reading through the Chronicles of Narnia for the second time together. And in there, especially you'll notice in the books that most of us are familiar with, one of the seven is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. In this book, you have lots of characters, but one of the characters is Lucy, and she's the youngest of the children. And Lucy has a very open heart, a very open mind to Aslan and to this place called Narnia, and to just an imagination. Now, Edmund, he's very critical of her, and he just likes to pick on her and create problems, and he's very open to the White Witch. She plants some seed in his heart, and he would rather, at the beginning, want the White Witch rather than Aslan. And so he lives his life in such a way to make that happen. Now, sometimes my children come to me with a question about the world, about how to do something, how to have a conversation, how to interact with a friend. And unless they have more knowledge about reality, I sometimes, not always, but sometimes struggle with how to explain something to them in a way that they can understand. Because they and I share a common thought world in Narnia, I can instantly bring up examples from Narnia. So in case of the moral example, I could say to my children that we would rather be like Lucy because Lucy does good with the knowledge that she has, rather than Edmund, who does wrong with the knowledge that he has and just simply wants to use it against somebody else. And as soon as I can draw forth that example, they share in the thought world, and now they can make sense of what has gone on. Now, we can do this with all kinds of things, articles, journals, stories, songs. But because we have a common thought world, we can start to illustrate how to understand a concept. The Great Divorce helps us to understand our own life, where we're at with the Lord. Now, as we're examining the prologue, one of the most, I think, pointed points in the prologue has to do with logic, actually. CS Lewis was very fond of using logic in all of his presentations, in all of his thinking. He's well known for great books that are both logical as well as well-written. An incredible bringing together of those two streams, the mind and the heart. Now, in the prologue, he talks about avoiding the both and adopting the either or. In logic, if there isn't a direct contradiction, you can know that it's both and. In other words, it doesn't have to go against each other. They can live well together. But if there's a direct contradiction, it's either the one thing or the other. An example of this would be either God exists or he doesn't. You can't have both. Now, C.S. Lewis brings this out in a different context. He brings it out in reference to, say, heaven and hell. In his time, I think, from my own reading, he was likely dealing with both churchmen and non-churchmen, who were trying to find ways of jiving the two together. That even the people who choose against God, maybe they will get to go to heaven one day. Even the people who want nothing to do with God, maybe they will go to heaven one day. And so they were bringing in the both and set of logic. They both can go together. Lewis sees this as an incredibly bad idea. He says the either or is the only thing that works on a journey like heaven and or a journey like hell. You can't have both. The people who actively don't want God, they have to not receive God. And he likens it to luggage. He says there are some journeys that you can't take all of your luggage on. Just the logical outworking of this. And so he says, let's adopt the either or. The either or wins the day. Either it's heaven or it's hell. There isn't both for all individuals. Now, I want to have a light conversation quick on traditional Christianity. You'll see this woven throughout my sermons. You'll see this woven throughout my lectures, that I want to represent the great Christian heritage of the first 500 and 1,000 years of the church, because I think that's where we find the most developed, well understanding of Christian truth. And so heaven and hell, as soon as I say those words, or maybe we can bring in purgatory as well, is going to elicit a whole set of images for you. And depending what your Christian background was, it might affect how you think about these subjects. If in the last 100 years and even before, there are some ideas, sometimes in theology we call them liberal ideas, whether that's an adequate term or not. The point is that there are some groups that have tried to say that all roads lead to heaven. All roads lead to God. And there is an opposite group that took a much more strident view opposing that group. We sometimes call them fundamentalists, that have the understanding that if somebody doesn't accept Jesus in, say, a revival service, or raise their hand to give their life to Jesus, or an altar call, or some prayer at their bedside, that if they don't accept them in an exact sort of formatted way that they understand to be right, then every last other individual is going to hell, and that's definitive, and they seem to know that very clearly, or at least they have an air to themselves that gives the impression that they know that very clearly. But I don't think the liberal vision or the fundamentalist vision is correct. Traditional Christianity has been very adamant that all roads do not lead to God. All roads do not lead to heaven. But it's been equally adamant that we don't know where every last individual is in their heart with the Lord and how He's communicated with them. So what we know is that anyone who comes to Jesus definitively makes it to heaven. Anyone who wants God definitively gets God, and they find Christ. But traditional Christianity hasn't speculated on the numbers games. Is it 1/3 of the people going to heaven? Is it 2/3? Is it a very tiny, tiny percentage and the rest just go to hell? Traditional Christianity has said, let's leave all of that up to God, but we are also very well aware that God is working to try to receive more individuals into His final kingdom. And He will give them every last choice and chance possible for them to reach out to Him through their conscience, to reach out to Him that they can know that there's a God by looking at nature, that they might have dreams or visions, or they might just see it to be reasonable and true. God has all kinds of avenues from which if they begin to reach out through, He will give them the rest of the story, and they will be with Him. Who those people are, even if they don't have all of the details that we Christians have on Sunday mornings, God will know. And anyone who wants God will receive Him. And that's good news. So the traditional picture totally agrees that there is a hell, as in a place or something where the idea is that those who reject God don't have to have God. See, logically, God can't force individuals into a relationship with Him. He can't say, well, to the person who doesn't want me, I'm going to force them to love me. That's backwards to the loving God that we know. So hell is best understood from the framework of the place, if there is a definitive place, of separation from God because those people didn't want God. That's what hell is understood to be. All of the other images that go along with it, I'll leave them to you to think through, and Lewis has plenty for us to think through with. But we want to make it very clear what those ideas are that traditional Christianity represents. Separation from God is hell, or hell is separation from God. That's the primary idea, and God is ultimately good. So to be without God is hell. To be without having God, but that's still what individuals want. And because free will exists, hell seems to be a necessary reality. The opportunity to separate from that which you don't want is hell, and therefore God offers that as an opportunity. Now, a couple of quick takeaways in this prologue. I think C.S. Lewis affirms the traditional picture. You read a number of his other works, he's neither the liberal, all roads lead directly to God and heaven, or he's neither the fundamentalist, that we definitively know everybody else is going to hell that hasn't gathered with us. The traditional picture, I think, is better justice and better grace and better mercy, and I think Lewis represents that very well. But what I want you to pay attention to in this story, in The Great Divorce, is that there will be a reversing of the evil that individuals have done. In this story, there's this gray zone or gray land, which is representative of, we might say, hell, or isolation away from God. And then there's the mountaintop, which is, of course, where God is, and it's where people are trying to go towards if they have a good heart and they're trying to follow after Him. But even those moments, we'll find in this story that there needs to be a reversing of evil. So even as you come to God, as you come to Christ, God forgives you. But now He asks you to go make right that which you have made wrong in the world. And I think this is an interesting takeaway for us as Christians. Sometimes in the Protestant world, we get this idea that because we're forgiven, we never have to go make amends for the things that we've done wrong. And I don't know that all of the things that any one of us have done wrong can always be made amends for. We're certainly not doing it to earn our place before God. But the idea of restitution, or going back and untwisting the wickedness that we originally brought into the world, you'll notice that woven on into this account. And I don't think it's something that we want to lose as we enter into the early chapters of this book. So with all that being said, I hope that this book can be an opportunity to examine your life. And because you've examined your life, it'll be more worth living.